She stood at the weathered security gate in worn combat boots and a simple gray tracksuit, her dark hair pulled back in a tight military bun, a thin scar running along her left collarbone disappearing beneath her collar. The cadet manning the checkpoint barely glanced up from his clipboard, dismissing her as just another contractor or support staff. He had no way of knowing that the woman before him had commanded Operation Nighthawk, the deadliest SEAL team extraction ever undertaken, had led 203 combat missions across 3 continents, carried the weight of fallen teammates in her memory every single day, and had been personally selected by the Director of Naval Operations to reshape an entire generation of military officers. In the next 24 hours, that same cadet would discover exactly who he had just turned away at the gate. And by then, it would be far too late to take back the disrespect that was about to change everything. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. The morning light at Ridgemont Naval Academy arrived slowly, reluctant and gray, filtering through layers of coastal fog that clung to the compound like a reluctant visitor. The academy sprawled across 200 acres of carefully manicured grounds, parade fields the color of fresh cash, barracks arranged in perfect geometric patterns, administrative buildings constructed from pale stone that spoke of tradition and permanence. Everything about Ridgemont existed in sharp contrast to the wild ocean that surrounded it on 3 sides, as if the institution itself was a fortress against chaos, against the unpredictable nature of warfare and loss. The security gate sat at the northern entrance, a modest structure of steel and reinforced concrete that served as the threshold between the civilian world and the disciplined military order within. 2 guards typically manned the post during daylight hours, young enlisted personnel rotating through administrative duties, viewing their gate assignment as a necessary but boring prerequisite to more important work. This morning, it was Cadet Second Class Gregory Harmon who occupied the primary position, his uniform immaculate, his posture rigid, his attention fixed on the credential verification system before him. Gregory had arrived at Ridgemont 14 months earlier, the son of Admiral Richard Harmon, whose career trajectory had been nothing short of meteoric. 3 decades of service, multiple commands, a reputation for tactical brilliance and uncompromising standards. Gregory carried his father's legacy like armor, invisible but essential, protecting him from the ordinary doubts that plagued most cadets. At 23 years old, with the broad shoulders of a competitive swimmer and the confident bearing of someone who had never truly failed at anything, Gregory embodied the Ridgemont ideal. His academic scores placed him in the top 5% of his class. His leadership evaluations were consistently exceptional. His peers regarded him with a mixture of envy and respect. What Gregory did not have was humility. He did not understand the weight of unknown unknowns. He had never confronted a situation where his family name meant nothing, where his credentials offered no protection, where the rules he had learned to navigate so effectively simply did not apply. All of that was about to change. Ridgemont Naval Academy had stood on its coastal perch for 96 years, surviving economic collapse, military reorganization, and the constant pressure to modernize while remaining true to its foundational principles. The academy trained officers, future commanders who would lead naval operations, coordinate with allied forces, make decisions whose consequences would ripple across oceans and affect the lives of thousands. The institution took these responsibilities seriously. Every aspect of the academy, from the precise arrangement of barracks to the carefully structured curriculum, existed to instill specific values: discipline, integrity, tactical excellence, and above all, the understanding that military leadership was a sacred trust. Not an entitlement, not a family tradition to be inherited, but a responsibility earned through demonstrated competence and tested character. The commandant of the academy was Captain David Voss, a man in his late 50s whose career had taken a sudden and unexpected turn 2 years earlier. After commanding a destroyer task force in the Arabian Sea, Voss had been approached by the Director of Naval Operations with an unusual proposition. The Naval Special Warfare Command had identified a problem: too many officers advancing to senior positions without truly understanding what leadership meant in the field, without having been tested by conditions where theory collapsed and only instinct and judgment remained. Voss had been selected to implement a solution, but Voss could not do it alone. The program required someone with unquestionable credibility, someone whose presence would command respect not through rank or authority, but through lived experience. Someone who had looked death in the face and had helped others survive it. That person was arriving this morning. Commander Rachel Winters stood outside the security gate in the gathering morning light, her credentials badge hanging from a simple lanyard, her expression revealing nothing of the calculus running behind her eyes. At 38 years old, she looked like she could be anyone. A fitness instructor, perhaps, or a weapons specialist, or a supply officer rotating through administrative duties. Her face bore the weathered appearance of someone who had spent years under harsh sun, but her eyes remained sharp, constantly assessing, constantly measuring. The scar along her collarbone, visible because she deliberately wore it visible, was the only hint that her history extended beyond the routine. It was a souvenir from Operation Nighthawk, a piece of shrapnel from a grenade that had exploded inches from her position while she was stabilizing a wounded teammate. The scar tissue had healed poorly, creating a pale, irregular line that drew attention whether she wanted it to or not. She wanted it to. The scar was a reminder, a physical manifestation of cost. Everyone who saw it should understand, on some level, that her presence meant something. That her methods would come from a place of earned knowledge. That the standards she would impose were not arbitrary or sadistic, but drawn from the only laboratory that mattered, the field. But Gregory Harmon saw only the scar, not its meaning. He saw worn combat boots and a simple tracksuit and made an immediate assessment. Support personnel, logistical staff, someone outside the core chain of command. Credentials, he said, not bothering to look up from his clipboard. His tone carried the casual dismissal of someone speaking to someone beneath his notice. Rachel extended her badge without comment, watching as Gregory scanned it, watched as his expression shifted infinitesimally. A flicker of confusion, a moment of hesitation, before he returned the badge and waved her through with the same casual gesture he might use to dismiss a delivery driver. He had no idea what he had just done. No idea that he had just been measured and found wanting. No idea that the woman he had dismissed in less than 30 seconds would spend the next day and a half demonstrating exactly how far his understanding of military excellence fell short. But he would learn. Everyone at Ridgemont would learn. As Rachel Winters passed through the security gate, she allowed herself the smallest acknowledgement of what was about to unfold. Not a smile exactly, but a tightening of her jaw that suggested resolve. The fog seemed to part before her as she moved deeper into the academy grounds, her boots striking the pavement with a measured, purposeful rhythm. Behind her, Gregory Harmon had already forgotten the encounter, his attention returning to his clipboard, to the routine flow of credentialed personnel passing through his checkpoint. He was thinking about lunch. He was thinking about his afternoon tactical operations seminar. He was thinking about everything except the woman who had just walked past him. The woman who had led 203 combat missions, who had made decisions that had saved lives and haunted her simultaneously, who carried the weight of Lieutenant James Morrison in her memory every single day and had structured her entire second career around ensuring that no one else would have to experience that particular loss again. The morning fog continued to roll across Ridgemont Naval Academy. The parade ground glistened under gathering daylight. The institution remained as it had for 96 years, a fortress of tradition and discipline, waiting to be tested by someone who understood exactly what it took to truly forge a leader. Rachel Winters walked toward the administration building, her shadow stretching long behind her in the early light. The transformation was about to begin. The morning assembly at Ridgemont Naval Academy occurred with mechanical precision every Monday through Friday at 0700 hours. Cadets formed in their designated squads on the parade ground, uniforms pressed to standards that would satisfy a forensic inspector, boots polished to a mirror shine, faces arranged in expressions of professional neutrality. The parade ground itself was a study in geometric perfection. Rows aligned with laser precision, spacing maintained to the centimeter, the Academy's colors hanging from the central flagpole with almost ceremonial solemnity. Cadet Second Class Gregory Harmon stood at the front of Bravo Squadron, his position earned through consistent top rankings in both academic performance and physical fitness evaluations. At this hour, with the morning light just beginning to cut through the fog, Gregory's posture was impeccable, shoulders back, chin level, eyes forward with the intensity of someone who understood that military bearing was not merely about physical position but about psychological presence. He took pride in this. The discipline came naturally to him, as it did to most things in his life. Excellence was not something Gregory aspired to. It was something he simply embodied. To his immediate left stood Cadet Third Class Marcus Whitfield, a brilliant tactical student whose family had no military connections whatsoever. Marcus had earned his position at Ridgemont through sheer intellectual capacity and an almost obsessive dedication to mastering military theory. To Gregory's right stood Cadet Second Class Sarah Chun. No, that name was wrong. Sarah Patterson, tall and athletically gifted, with a reputation for executing orders with mechanical efficiency and rarely asking questions about their purpose. "Attention on deck," called the senior cadet, and the formation snapped into even sharper focus, every body responding to the command with trained simultaneity. Captain David Voss strode onto the parade ground with the bearing of someone accustomed to commanding attention. Behind him, moving with a stride that suggested complete comfort in any environment, came the woman from the security gate. She wore the same simple gray tracksuit she had arrived in, and now that she stood before the assembled academy, Gregory found himself truly looking at her for the first time. She was small-framed, not diminished but compact, the kind of physical build that suggested function over presentation. Her face was weathered in a way that academy cosmetics and careful grooming could never achieve. The scar along her collarbone was visible, deliberately so, and it caught Gregory's attention more than he wanted to admit. Whatever that scar represented, it was not acquired during routine service. "Cadets," Captain Voss's voice carried across the parade ground without strain. "This is Commander Rachel Winters, our new senior instructor for the Advanced Leadership Development Program. Commander Winters brings extensive field experience to Ridgemont. You will afford her every courtesy and respect due her rank and position." There was something in Voss's tone that suggested this introduction carried weight beyond the simple words. Gregory noticed it distantly, the way one notices an oddity without fully processing its significance. "Commander, they're all yours," Voss said, stepping aside. Rachel stepped forward, and the parade ground seemed to shift slightly, though no one had physically moved. She surveyed the formation with a gaze that felt less like looking at cadets and more like cataloging data points. Her eyes moved methodically across the rows, pausing occasionally as if she were making notes in her mind about specific individuals. When her gaze reached Gregory, he felt something unexpected. Not quite unease, but a heightened awareness that he was being measured against some standard he didn't fully understand. "Good morning, cadets," Rachel said, her voice calm and measured, neither loud nor soft, the voice of someone who knew she would be heard without raised volume. "My name is Commander Rachel Winters. For the next 8 weeks, I will be working with selected members of your class on a specialized curriculum. Today, we begin with a simple run. 8 miles. Full gear. Standard pace." A murmur ran through the formation. 8 miles was substantial, especially in full combat gear. Gregory felt the familiar sensation of confidence rising in his chest. 8 miles was manageable. He ran half marathons on weekends. His conditioning was exceptional by any measure. "Before we depart," Rachel continued, "I want to address something. This program exists because there is a gap in conventional military education. That gap is between theory and reality, between what you know and what you understand, between the officer you think you are and the officer you will need to become when lives depend on your decisions." She paused, allowing the statement to settle. "I'm here to address that gap. That process will be uncomfortable. Some of you will question it. Some of you will question me." Her eyes moved to Gregory again, just for a fraction of a second. "All of you will be tested in ways that classroom instruction cannot achieve." Gregory listened to this speech with the practiced attention of someone trained to absorb information efficiently. The commander was clearly experienced. The scar, the measured confidence, the deliberate phrasing, all suggested someone who had walked a path different from the typical officer trajectory. But experience did not necessarily mean she understood Ridgemont. It did not mean she understood the caliber of cadet she was addressing, the backgrounds they came from, the standards they had already been held to. An 8-mile run was well within Gregory's capacity. The physical challenge, if challenge it could be called, would be minimal. After the formation broke and cadets settled into the easy pace of a group run, Gregory found himself alongside Sarah Patterson, their strides matching unconsciously as they had done dozens of times during academy-mandated physical training. "What do you make of her?" Gregory asked, keeping his voice low enough that nearby cadets wouldn't immediately hear. Sarah was quiet for a moment, her breathing steady and controlled. "She moves differently than other instructors," she finally said. "Did you see how she moved when she was watching us? It's like she's aware of everything at once." "She's probably just trying to establish authority," Gregory replied, and he heard in his own voice the dismissal he hadn't intended to make so obvious. Someone with actual command experience teaching at an academy, that's usually a placeholder assignment. Career maintenance before transition to civilian life or promotion. "I'd be surprised if she's actually done anything significant in the field." "My father mentioned something interesting," came a voice from Gregory's other side. Marcus Whitfield had positioned himself to join the conversation. "I was looking at the academy directory last night. Commander Winters doesn't appear anywhere in the standard faculty roster. There's just a note about special instructor status with a security clearance designation I don't have access to." Gregory processed this information. Unusual assignment structure, classified background. But unusual was not the same as impressive. His own father was an admiral whose operational experience had been extensive, and yet Gregory had learned long ago that impressive credentials did not necessarily translate to practical competence in teaching environments. "My father probably knows her," Gregory said, and even as he spoke the words, he recognized them as a form of armor. A reminder to himself and to his companions that his family connections provided him with information and perspective they lacked. If she had significant combat command experience, he would know her name. "And I'm fairly certain he's never mentioned her." This assertion seemed to satisfy the conversation temporarily. Around them, the formation continued its steady 8-mile progression across the academy grounds. Rachel ran near the back of the group, her breathing controlled, her form economical and efficient, her attention apparently divided among dozens of cadets at once. Gregory did not notice that she was specifically watching him. He did not see the moment when she catalogued his arrogance, recognized the privilege in his voice, identified the exact moment when his confidence tipped from healthy self-assurance into something more problematic. That recognition would come later. For now, Gregory Harmond remained confident in his understanding of the world. Confident that his family's position meant something, that his academic achievements mattered more than he could yet comprehend, and that whatever Commander Rachel Winters represented, it would ultimately pose no real challenge to his trajectory toward senior command. He was about to discover exactly how wrong that confidence would prove to be. The announcement came on a Tuesday afternoon through official channels, a memo distributed to all senior cadets and faculty outlining the new Advanced Leadership Development Program. The memo was sparse on details, intentionally so, Gregory would later realize. It mentioned only that Commander Rachel Winters would be conducting specialized training sessions beginning the following week, that participation would be mandatory for selected cadets, and that the program had direct authorization from the Naval Operations Command. What the memo did not explain was who Rachel Winters actually was, what credentials qualified her for this role, what her background entailed, what made her suitable to instruct cadets at an institution like Ridgemont. In the days following her initial introduction on the parade ground, Rachel moved through the academy with a presence that was difficult to articulate but impossible to ignore. She occupied space differently than other instructors. She walked with the measured confidence of someone who had learned, through hard experience, that rushing accomplished nothing. She observed cadets during meals, during tactical operations seminars, during physical training sessions, always watching, always assessing, always maintaining that same analytical distance that suggested she was compiling information for purposes none of them could fully grasp. The Academy's gossip network activated with characteristic speed. Speculation about Rachel's background traveled through barracks, through study halls, through the corridors of the physical training facilities like wildfire. By Wednesday, 3 competing narratives had emerged. She was a former intelligence operative who had transitioned to education. She was a weapons specialist brought in to modernize the Academy's tactical curriculum. Or she was simply a high-ranking administrative officer rotated through instructor duty as part of routine career progression. None of these narratives felt quite right, but without concrete information, the cadets had little choice but to construct meaning from the limited data available. Gregory participated in these speculations only peripherally, offering occasional comments that dismissed Rachel's significance while privately maintaining a more complicated set of observations. The dismissal was partly genuine. He truly did believe that her presence at the academy suggested a career plateau rather than specialized expertise, but it was also partly defensive. Something about Rachel's gaze, when it had landed on him during that first morning assembly, had triggered an awareness he did not welcome. It was on Friday of that week when Gregory's perspective shifted, however marginally. He was in the academy library, ostensibly researching tactical doctrine for a seminar but primarily killing time before dinner. The library occupied the eastern wing of the administration building, a space of soaring ceilings, strategic windows, and carefully organized stacks that smelled faintly of old paper and institutional purpose. Gregory had claimed a corner desk near the historical archives, a position that offered both privacy and the subtle status of being isolated enough to suggest serious scholarly work. He was reviewing a classified operations analysis when a shadow fell across his desk. Gregory looked up, expecting to encounter one of his classmates or perhaps a faculty member on routine inspection. Instead, he found Rachel Winters standing 3 feet from his position, reading materials in hand, studying his work with the casual interest one might extend toward any cadet engaged in legitimate research. Counterinsurgency Operations, 2010 to 2015, Rachel observed, not asking a question but stating a fact. Her eyes moved from the document in front of Gregory to his face. Interesting choice. Most cadets focus on more contemporary doctrine. Gregory felt something shift in his carefully constructed certainty. There was nothing hostile in Rachel's observation, nothing accusatory, and yet the comment landed with a weight that suggested evaluation. The foundational principles remain relevant, Gregory replied, keeping his tone professional, carefully neutral. Modern doctrine builds on established methodology. True, Rachel acknowledged, and something in her expression suggested genuine agreement rather than mere tolerance. Though there's a significant difference between understanding doctrine and understanding why doctrine exists, between knowing what worked in historical contexts and understanding why it failed in others. She set her materials, 3 volumes on military strategy, another on unit cohesion and decision-making under stress, on the table beside his. The selection struck Gregory as oddly specific, not the casual choices of someone browsing for general reference but the deliberate choices of someone researching particular problems. "Are you teaching a seminar?" Gregory asked, the question emerging before he had fully considered its implications. "Research," Rachel replied simply. "Personal interest. The Academy Library has surprisingly comprehensive materials on operational psychology." She moved to leave, then paused, turning back to regard Gregory with that same measuring gaze. "For your counterinsurgency research, consider focusing on the decision-making architecture. How commanders prioritize information. How they distinguish between strategic significance and tactical urgency. How they maintain clarity when operating with incomplete data. The doctrine is important, but the psychology of command is essential." Then she was gone, moving between the shelves with that same economical grace Gregory had noticed during their run, leaving him alone with his research and the uncomfortable sensation that he had just been assessed and found wanting in ways he could not articulate. Over the following week, Gregory found himself noticing more details about Rachel that had previously escaped his attention. The way she moved through the academy suggested familiarity with military logistics that seemed beyond what a recent administrative assignment would require. When she was present in common areas, her attention divided itself with remarkable efficiency. She could maintain a conversation while simultaneously assessing the physical conditioning levels of cadets crossing the parade ground, noting posture, stride length, the presence or absence of fatigue markers. Her uniform, when she wore one, bore no visible insignia beyond her rank, but the cut and condition of the fabric suggested someone accustomed to military dress rather than someone for whom it remained novel. The scar along her collarbone, which she never attempted to conceal, bore evidence of professional medical treatment. The the kind of intervention available only through military medical systems. On Thursday of the second week, Gregory found himself in conversation with Marcus Whitfield in the Academy Library during a free study period. "I've been researching her," Marcus admitted, lowering his voice as they claimed seats in a back corner. "Not her officially, because there's almost no official information. But I found references in declassified operation reports from 2012 and 2013. A Captain Rachel Winters, the first name matches and the timeline makes sense, was cited in 2 separate after-action reports from naval operations in the Indian Ocean. The reports were mostly redacted, but her name appeared in contexts suggesting command-level decision-making during complex operations. Gregory processed this information. Command-level decisions during complex operations. Not administrative duty. Not strategic advisory. Actual operational command. "What kind of operations?" Gregory asked. "The reports don't specify. Everything substantive is classified or redacted. But the language suggests rapid response scenarios, the kind of situations where decisions need to be made with incomplete information and potentially significant consequences." Marcus leaned back in his chair, his expression reflecting the same uncertainty Gregory felt. Whatever she did, it wasn't routine. And whatever it was, the military decided it was significant enough to merit classification and security clearance restrictions. That evening, Gregory found himself watching Rachel during dinner. She sat at the faculty table, eating with the same measured efficiency she brought to every activity, conversing with Captain Voss about something that elicited a response Gregory could not hear from his distance but which seemed to carry some significance. Whatever they were discussing, it was clearly not casual academy business. The following morning, as Gregory prepared for the day's physical training session, he found a sealed envelope in his barracks with his name handwritten on the exterior. His heart rate elevated. Official communications typically came through digital channels or announced protocols. This bore all the markers of something unusual. Inside was a single line of text, written in precise handwriting. "Report to Training Field 7 at 0500 tomorrow. Come alone. Bring nothing except water and your uniform. This is not optional." The memo was unsigned, but Gregory knew immediately who it was from. Rachel Winters had just issued a summons that carried the weight of something between invitation and ultimatum. He had no idea that this moment, this sealed envelope, this cryptic instruction, represented the threshold between his previous understanding of himself and a version he could not yet imagine. The next morning at 0500, as the academy slept and fog rolled across the coastal terrain, Gregory would discover that everything he believed about his own competence, his own potential, and his own place within the military hierarchy was about to be tested by someone whose actual background and capabilities remained, even now, shrouded in mystery and suggestion. Rachel Winters did not reveal herself all at once. She revealed herself in layers, through actions and demonstrations rather than declarations. And by the time Gregory understood who she actually was, it would be far too late to take back any of the arrogance he had displayed. The alarm on Gregory's watch vibrated silently at 0445, pulling him from sleep with the efficiency of military precision. He had set it deliberately 20 minutes before the designated time, allowing himself adequate opportunity to prepare while maintaining the appearance of punctuality. Standard military protocol. He dressed in workout gear, compression shorts, academy-issued physical training shirt, running shoes with fresh laces. Water bottle filled from the barracks sink. Nothing else. Just as the sealed envelope had instructed. The pre-dawn darkness at Ridgemont Naval Academy felt different at this hour. The parade ground that gleamed under daylight became something other in the absence of the sun, a landscape of shadows and suggestion, where the careful geometry of military order seemed less assured. Gregory moved through the academy's perimeter with practiced silence, following the route toward Training Field 7, a secondary facility used primarily for tactical scenario exercises and advanced physical conditioning work. Training Field 7 sat approximately half a mile from the main barracks complex, positioned in a transitional zone between the academy's carefully maintained grounds and the wild coastal terrain that bordered the institution on its southern edge. The field itself was roughly square, perhaps 200 meters on each side, surrounded by a perimeter of low brush and sparse trees. During daylight hours, it was a functional space designed for tactical exercises. In the darkness before dawn, it was simply empty, or appeared to be, until Gregory saw the single figure standing at the field's center. Rachel Winters stood motionless approximately 30 meters from the field's entrance, illuminated by the fading remnants of starlight. She wore identical athletic gear to Gregory's own: compression shorts, standard academy physical training shirt, running shoes, but the similarity in clothing could not disguise the fundamental differences in how she occupied the space. Her posture suggested absolute comfort, absolute control. She was breathing steadily, as if she had not simply been standing in the darkness but had been engaged in some activity that demanded her complete focus. "You're early," Rachel observed as Gregory approached. Not a comment but a data point. 0455. 5 minutes before the designated time. That suggests either anxiety or preparation. Which is it? Gregory felt something tighten in his chest. The question carried no judgment, but the absence of judgment somehow made it more challenging to answer. He chose to treat it as a genuine inquiry rather than a rhetorical challenge. "Preparation," he replied. "Arriving early demonstrates commitment to the assignment and provides time for environmental assessment." Rachel's expression did not change. "Environmental assessment," she repeated. "What have you assessed?" Gregory had expected the question and had prepared an answer. The field is approximately 200 meters on each side. Terrain is relatively flat with minor elevation variations on the eastern perimeter. The surrounding tree line provides potential cover for observation. The time is approximately 0455, which places us in the window between night operations and dawn operations, a transitional period that favors neither tactical scenario distinctly. "Thorough," Rachel acknowledged, "and accurate as far as it goes, but incomplete. You've assessed the physical environment. You haven't assessed the human environment. You haven't assessed me." She moved then, walking toward Gregory with that same economical stride he had observed before. She stopped approximately 3 meters away, her body language suggesting neither threat nor deference, simply presence. "Let me correct that deficiency for you," Rachel continued. "My respiration is controlled. My posture is relaxed but alert. My attention is divided between you and the surrounding environment simultaneously. The calluses on my hands suggest years of consistent physical labor. My gait suggests lower body conditioning at a level beyond what routine military service typically requires. The scar along my collarbone indicates previous combat-related trauma. These are the human assessments you should have made before arriving at this location." Gregory found himself unable to generate an immediate response. The observations were accurate, delivered without hostility but with a weight that suggested they were not merely observational commentary but rather a demonstration of capability. "Now," Rachel said, "we will begin your actual training. The purpose of this evolution is not to punish you, though I understand you may interpret it that way. The purpose is to establish baseline data regarding your physical capacity, your problem-solving methodology under stress, and your ability to adapt when circumstances change from your initial assumptions. Do you understand?" "Yes, ma'am," Gregory replied, falling back on the formality that had governed his interactions throughout his academy experience. "Good," Rachel said. "We will run a tactical assessment course. The course consists of 4 separate stations positioned at different locations across this field and the surrounding terrain. At each station, you will encounter a specific scenario. Your task is to solve that scenario according to the parameters provided. The scenarios will increase in complexity. They will also increase in physical demand. You will have 60 minutes to complete all 4 stations. You will begin at Station 1, located at the northern perimeter. Go." She pointed, and Gregory moved without hesitation, his military conditioning overriding any consideration of what awaited him. The northern perimeter of Training Field 7, approached in the pre-dawn darkness, resolved itself into a partially constructed barrier course, low walls requiring climb over technique, rope sections suggesting physical negotiation, and most significantly, a sealed envelope sitting atop a wooden platform. Gregory retrieved the envelope and opened it. Inside, a single page of instructions, Obstacle course progression. Low wall climb over. Proper technique required. Rope descent, 30 feet. Balance beam, 15 feet. Physical progression only. No modification of obstacles permitted. Complete within 12 minutes. Timer begins now. Gregory had completed obstacle courses numerous times during his academy experience. The physical components presented no theoretical challenge. He approached the low wall with the confidence of someone who had executed similar movements hundreds of times, planted his hands, vaulted over with controlled momentum. The rope descent he handled methodically, using standard rappelling technique. The balance beam required concentration but not extraordinary capability. He completed the course in 8 minutes, his breathing elevated but controlled. He turned to find Rachel waiting approximately 50 meters away, watching with the same analytical expression she maintained constantly. "Station 2, Rachel said simply, pointing toward the eastern perimeter. Station 2 presented a different challenge. Another sealed envelope, another set of instructions. This station involved water obstacles, a waist-deep pool requiring underwater navigation around submerged barriers, a weighted sled that required pushing through water for a designated distance, and a simulated rescue scenario involving a weighted training dummy that needed to be extracted from water and positioned for medical evacuation. The physical demand was greater. Gregory found himself breathing harder, his muscles beginning to register fatigue. The simulated rescue scenario required problem-solving under physical stress, figuring out the most efficient technique for managing the dummy's weight while simultaneously maintaining his own positioning in water. He completed Station 2 in 14 minutes, exceeding the designated time window by 2 minutes. Station 3, Rachel announced, and Gregory was beginning to understand that this pattern would continue, that each station would demand something different, that the real test was not individual capability but sustained capability under mounting fatigue. Station 3 involved tactical navigation. Another sealed envelope contained coordinates on a laminated map. Gregory was required to navigate to those coordinates using map and compass, execute a tactical movement approach, and identify tactical assessment points positioned at the location. The darkness had begun lifting slightly, providing marginally better visibility but also presenting new complications. He had to move quickly enough to complete the task within the designated time frame while moving carefully enough to maintain tactical awareness. He found Station 4 at the southwestern perimeter, the final envelope containing instructions for a timed physical progression. Pull-ups, sprints, weighted carries, each element performed to specific standards. His arms were beginning to burn with fatigue. His legs protested with each burst of speed. But something had shifted in his mindset. This was not routine physical training. This was something else. This was assessment disguised as exercise, information gathering disguised as instruction. Rachel had been correct. She was not punishing him. She was measuring him. Measuring his capacity, his adaptability, his ability to persist when initial assumptions about the task proved insufficient to its actual demands. When Gregory completed the final station and stumbled back toward the field's center, Rachel was waiting precisely where he expected her to be. She was breathing slightly harder than before, but only marginally. She had clearly completed some form of parallel assessment herself. 47 minutes, Rachel said, checking her watch. 13 minutes under the designated limit. Your performance metrics are acceptable. Your technique is proficient. Your problem-solving methodology is adequate. She paused, and something flickered in her expression. Not quite approval, but something adjacent to it. But what you demonstrated today is individual capability. What you failed to demonstrate is understanding. Beginning tomorrow, you will learn the difference. Report to the medical facility for standard assessment. Then rest. We begin the actual training at 0600 tomorrow morning. Gregory stood in the pre-dawn light, exhausted and confused, beginning to understand that everything he had believed about his own competence had been accurate, but that accuracy was also insufficient to address whatever Rachel Winters actually represented. The exhaustion from the pre-dawn assessment course did not prevent Gregory from attending his regular classes and physical training sessions that Friday. The academy's schedule did not accommodate individual fatigue levels, and his pride would not permit him to request exemption or modification. He moved through the day with the mechanical efficiency of someone operating on residual conditioning rather than genuine recovery. His muscles protesting minor movements, his concentration fractured across multiple demands. What the assessment course had not accomplished was the dissolution of his certainty. If anything, the experience had paradoxically reinforced certain aspects of Gregory's worldview. Yes, Rachel Winters was clearly physically competent. Yes, her observational capabilities exceeded standard levels. But physical competence and observational capability did not necessarily translate to institutional authority or pedagogical expertise. The military was filled with individuals who possessed extraordinary operational skills but who struggled in teaching environments, who could execute complex tactical scenarios but who could not effectively transfer knowledge to others. Gregory voiced this perspective carefully to Marcus and Sarah during dinner on Friday evening, in a corner of the mess hall where their conversation would remain private. "She's clearly experienced," Gregory acknowledged, keeping his tone measured, analytical rather than dismissive. "That much is obvious. But experience does not automatically qualify someone to teach. Some of the most accomplished operators I've read about were terrible instructors. They couldn't articulate their own methodology effectively. They couldn't scale their expertise to different learning styles." Marcus studied Gregory with an expression that suggested skepticism. "You've been with her for one assessment course, and you're already developing pedagogical critiques?" "I'm offering observation," Gregory replied. "There's a difference between being good at something and being good at teaching it. She might be an exceptional field operator. That doesn't mean she understands leadership development at an institutional level." Sarah said nothing, but the expression on her face suggested she was processing something Gregory was not immediately articulating, or perhaps that she disagreed with his assessment but chose not to engage in argument. The following Monday, Rachel's actual training program commenced. The Advanced Leadership Development Curriculum met Monday through Friday at 0600, before standard academy activities began. 12 cadets had been selected: Gregory, Marcus, Sarah, and 9 others whose primary commonality seemed to be a combination of academic achievement and physical capability. They assembled on the parade ground at 0555, dressed in full combat gear, standing at loose formation as Rachel arrived carrying a rucksack that appeared deceptively ordinary. For the next 3 weeks, Rachel began without preamble. "Your training will focus on decision-making under adverse conditions. The Academy's standard curriculum teaches you what to decide. This program teaches you how to decide when circumstances prevent certainty. We begin with a 10-mile weighted ruck march. Full tactical gear. Navigational route provided. You will execute this march while maintaining formation integrity and addressing 3 embedded tactical scenarios. Each scenario will present you with incomplete information and require immediate command decisions. Begin." The march began in near total darkness. Rachel set a pace that was challenging but not impossible, approximately 15 minutes per mile, significantly faster than standard loaded marching cadence but requiring maintenance of focus and form. Gregory found himself positioned near the front of the formation, his natural inclination toward leadership placing him in proximity to Rachel's position. Halfway through the march, at the 5-mile point, Rachel brought the formation to a sudden halt. "Scenario 1, she announced. 2 minutes ago, the trailing members of your formation encountered a simulated IED. 3 cadets are wounded, 1 critically, 2 moderately. You have 5 minutes to determine triage priority, develop an evacuation plan, and brief your leadership. Go." What followed was controlled chaos. Gregory found himself immediately involved in the scenario development, taking charge of the wounded assessment, making split-second decisions about evacuation priorities. He determined that the critically wounded cadet would be evacuated first by the 2 strongest members of the formation, the moderately wounded would march under supported conditions, and the formation would adjust pace to accommodate the wounded's limitations. Rachel observed without comment, watching his decision-making process, noting his methodology, cataloging his choices. "Your triage assessment is sound," she said after 5 minutes. "Your resource allocation is reasonable. But you failed to assign leadership to the evacuation team. You failed to designate communication protocols between the forward group and the main formation. You failed to establish contingency procedures if additional casualties occur during evacuation. You completed the task. You did not complete it effectively. The second scenario occurred at mile 7. A simulated communication blackout. The formation was suddenly unable to receive further instructions from Rachel or higher command. They had to determine their next course of action based on the initial briefing parameters and their own tactical assessment. Gregory advocated for continuing the original route, reasoning that adherence to the plan was preferable to improvisation. Marcus argued for establishing a defensive perimeter and waiting for communication restoration. Sarah suggested splitting the formation to maintain pace while reducing exposure if additional complications developed. Rachel ultimately permitted Gregory's choice to proceed, but her expression suggested disappointment rather than approval. The third scenario involved a simulated hostile civilian population. The formation was required to navigate through a designated area where civilians, Academy staff members in civilian clothing, created obstacles, demanded explanations, and presented scenarios that complicated straightforward military progression. The objective required maintaining tactical integrity while managing civilian interaction without escalating conflict. By the time the formation completed the march at approximately 0800, Gregory's confidence had begun experiencing actual erosion. The physical exhaustion was manageable. His conditioning remained superior to most of his peers. But the persistent feedback suggesting his decision-making was incomplete or inadequate was beginning to penetrate the armor of his certainty. Over the following 2 weeks, this pattern continued and intensified. Rachel designed training evolutions that incorporated elements Gregory had never previously encountered, scenarios with deliberately incomplete information, exercises where multiple correct answers existed but some were demonstrably superior to others, training situations where his initial assessment would prove dangerously incorrect if implemented without deeper analysis. She did not criticize him harshly. If anything, her consistent feedback was more psychologically challenging because it was delivered without emotion. Pure data about performance gaps presented with absolute clarity. By the third Friday of the advanced program, Gregory's psychological state had shifted from dismissive to defensive. He began making comments in the missal about Rachel's methods being unnecessarily complicated, about her scenarios being artificial constructs that bore insufficient resemblance to actual operational conditions. "She's trying to make everything seem more important than it is," he said to Marcus during lunch on that Friday. "Real command isn't this convoluted. In actual operations, you get intelligence briefings. You receive clear parameters. You execute with appropriate resources. That's assuming everything goes according to plan," Marcus replied quietly. "Commander Winters keeps saying that planning is theory and operations are reality. Those are never the same thing." "That's military philosophy," Gregory countered. "That doesn't mean her training methodology is optimal for teaching it." The confrontation came that afternoon during a tactical scenario exercise. The formation was tasked with executing a contested building clearance, a complex 3-team maneuver requiring precise coordination, clear communication, and immediate adaptation when circumstances changed. Rachel had embedded what she called complications, unexpected obstacles, simulated casualties, communication malfunctions occurring at specific intervals. Gregory was designated as the primary tactical commander. He executed the scenario with technical proficiency. His team movements were coordinated, his communication was clear, and his decisions were defensible. But halfway through the clearance, when a simulated communications malfunction occurred simultaneously with a simulated casualty in the supporting team, Gregory made a command decision that prioritized mission completion over casualty evacuation. Rachel stopped the scenario immediately. "Explain your decision," she said, and there was something different in her voice, something colder, more evaluative. "The primary objective was building clearance," Gregory replied. "Communication malfunction required maintaining previous course of action to prevent mission failure. At what cost? The casualty was assessed as non-critical. The delay for evacuation would have compromised. At what cost?" Rachel repeated, and now there was something in her expression that had previously been absent. Not anger, but something adjacent to it. Coldness. An absolute absence of sympathy or understanding. A delay in casualty evacuation would have resulted in casualty deterioration, she continued, addressing the entire formation. In actual operations, the difference between immediate evacuation and delayed evacuation can mean the difference between survival and death. Cadet Harmond prioritized mission completion over personnel safety. That is a fundamental leadership failure. Something inside Gregory's carefully maintained composure fractured. The criticism was not wrong, but it was disproportionate to the scenario's actual complexity. He had made a reasonable judgment with the information available. The scenario's design was deliberately forcing impossible choices. "With respect, ma'am," he said, and his voice carried an edge that had not been present before. The scenario parameters created a false binary. In actual operations, there would be additional resources, clearer intelligence, better communication systems. This exercise is artificially. He did not complete the sentence. Rachel had moved with sudden decisive action, not threatening but positioning herself directly in front of him with an intensity that stopped him mid-sentence. "You believe my scenario is artificial," she said, her voice absolutely quiet. "You believe it does not reflect actual operational reality. You believe you understand operational reality better than I do." The formation had gone completely silent. Every cadet had registered the shift in Rachel's demeanor. "Tomorrow," Rachel continued, "you will discover what actual operational reality involves. This time, you will not be observing a scenario. You will be executing one. Alone. Full tactical gear, sealed instructions, designated endpoint. You report to the command center at 0500. You will not return until you have either completed the assigned evolution or demonstrated that you cannot complete it. Either outcome will provide valuable information regarding your actual operational suitability." She stepped back, her expression returning to its standard analytical neutrality. Formation dismissed. Cadets Harmond remains. As the other cadets departed, each offering covert glances toward Gregory that ranged from sympathy to vindication, Gregory stood at attention, understanding that his dismissal of Rachel Winters had finally triggered a response that transcended teaching methodology. Whatever was about to happen would not be theoretical. The apartment Rachel occupied sat 3 miles from Ridgemont Naval Academy, in a modest residential complex that housed primarily military personnel and their families. The space was sparse, functionally furnished but devoid of personal decoration or the casual accumulation of objects that typically marked human habitation. A bed, a desk, a single comfortable chair positioned to face the window overlooking the coastal landscape. Everything was organized with military precision, everything serving a specific purpose, nothing present that did not contribute to essential function. On the evening of the day Gregory Harmond had been assigned his solo evolution, Rachel sat at that desk with a leather journal open before her. The journal was worn, its pages yellowed with age, its leather cover bearing the marks of handling across multiple years. She did not open it immediately. Instead, she simply looked at it, her hand resting on its surface, and allowed her mind to drift backward across more than a decade. The memory arrived without warning or gradation, simply present, as if no time had passed at all between then and now. The landscape was different, mountains rather than coastline, dust rather than salt air, the particular quality of light that existed only in certain parts of the world. The year was 2012. The location was classified, though the designation Helmand Province would have been accurate for geographic purposes. The operation was called Nighthawk, though only those directly involved understood the full scope of what that designation encompassed. Rachel had been a captain then, not yet 30 years old, selected as one of the first women integrated into Naval Special Warfare Command's operational teams. She commanded a 6-person unit that specialized in rapid extraction operations, situations where personnel needed to be removed from hostile territory with speed and precision, where traditional military protocols were insufficient to the actual demands of the situation. Her team consisted of 5 men, each selected for specific expertise: demolitions specialist, signals and communications, medical capability, and Lieutenant James Morrison. Morrison had been her team leader, technically, though the command structure within special operations units operated differently than standard military hierarchy. Morrison held the rank, but Rachel held the respect. When decisions needed to be made, people listened to Rachel. When the situation deteriorated, people looked to Rachel. They understood, without articulating it, that she possessed a capacity for clarity under pressure that exceeded normal parameters. Morrison understood this as well. He had never resented it or resisted it. If anything, he seemed to take pride in having identified capability in someone who had been initially dismissed because of her gender. They had trained together for 18 months before their first operation. 18 months of shared experience, of learning each other's instinctive responses, of building the kind of implicit communication that only developed through sustained exposure to danger. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time. So if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The operation that defined everything began at 0200 hours on a moonless night. They were tasked with extracting an asset, an Afghan intelligence officer who had been compromised and whose location had been discovered by hostile forces. The extraction was supposed to be straightforward. Insert via helicopter, locate the asset, provide security during the ground movement, extract via helicopter at a secondary location. The plan assumed the asset's location had remained secure. The plan assumed hostile forces had not already established a cordon around the extraction zone. The plan assumed that the information on which the entire operation was based had not been fundamentally compromised. All three assumptions were incorrect. The first indication of the problem came as their helicopter touched down for insertion. The pilot reported unusual heat signatures on the thermal imaging, multiple positions, coordinated spacing, the tactical arrangement of forces prepared for ambush. Within seconds of recognition, the insertion helicopter came under fire. Rachel's team was forced to take defensive positions immediately, the extraction plan dissolving into active combat before they had even fully deployed. They moved to cover, returning fire, assessing the situation with the kind of clarity that only emerged when the choice was between tactical competence and death. Morrison moved toward Rachel's position, his expression already shifting from tactical focus to something else, something that suggested he was calculating probabilities and finding them unfavorable. Asset is approximately 200 meters northeast, Morrison said, his voice carrying the controlled precision of someone operating on pure focus. Hostile positions appear to form a three-sided cordon, heaviest concentration to the south and east. They knew, Rachel said, understanding in that moment the trap that had been constructed. The intelligence was intentionally leaked. They're not here for the asset. They're here for us. Morrison nodded once, his expression not changing. Which means we have limited time before they complete the encirclement. We need to move. What followed was a 32-minute firefight conducted across difficult terrain in near-total darkness, complicated by the need to locate and protect a non-combatant asset while simultaneously addressing hostile forces that possessed superior positioning and numerical advantage. Rachel's team moved with practiced efficiency, each member knowing their role, each decision made with the assumption that hesitation meant death. They located the asset, a man in his 50s, frightened and disoriented, and began moving toward the secondary extraction point. The hostile fire increased in intensity. One of her team members, Sergeant Wilson, took shrapnel from a fragmentary device and went down. Another team member, Petty Officer Chun, moved to provide medical assistance while maintaining covering fire. Morrison was moving with Rachel, their positions coordinated, their communication operating on levels that required only minimal verbal exchange. They covered approximately 150 meters before Morrison suddenly stopped, his body language shifting to absolute alertness. "Incoming," he said, and there was something in his voice that suggested he had made a calculation and accepted the result. The rocket-propelled grenade came from approximately 60 meters away, its trajectory taking it directly toward Rachel's position. Morrison saw it. He registered its velocity and angle. He understood, in the single second available to him, that Rachel was in its path. He moved toward her, not away but toward her, his body positioning itself between the weapon's trajectory and her location. The explosion occurred with the kind of violence that reorganized the surrounding landscape. Shrapnel scattered in a pattern that would have been fatal to anyone in the radius. Morrison took the brunt of the blast at close range. His body absorbed the fragmentation, his position relative to Rachel absorbing the force that would otherwise have killed her as well. He fell. He did not rise. Rachel moved to him immediately, her hands applying pressure to the wounds his body had sustained, her voice calling for the medic, her mind fragmenting between the reality of what had occurred and the operational necessity of continuing function. Morrison's eyes remained open. He was conscious. He was aware. "Get them out," he said. His voice was barely audible beneath the continuing gunfire. "Rachel, listen to me. Get them out." "You're coming with us?" Rachel replied, her hands continuing their futile pressure against wounds that no field medicine could address. "Stay with me, James. Stay with me." "I'm not," Morrison said, and his eyes held absolute certainty. "But they are. The asset, the team, everyone. You're going to get them out. You're going to lead them home. That's an order." He said it again, his grip on her wrist tightening momentarily. "Lead them home." Then his eyes lost focus, and the finest officer Rachel had ever served with ceased to exist. The next 43 minutes were defined by crystalline focus and absolute refusal to acknowledge the weight of what she had just experienced. Rachel coordinated the extraction of the asset, established a defensive perimeter, called an air support, provided covering fire while her team moved toward the secondary extraction point. She moved through those minutes operating on a foundation of muscle memory and will, her conscious mind compartmentalized away from the reality of Morrison's loss, her operational self functioning with mechanical precision. The helicopter extracted them at 0255 hours. They were all alive, everyone except Morrison. The asset was secure. The mission was technically successful. Rachel spent the next 6 hours being debriefed, her account of the operation recorded by personnel who documented the tactical details without understanding the personal cost. She was awarded the Navy Cross for her actions during the extraction. She was commended for her leadership under fire. She was recognized as someone who had demonstrated exceptional capability in the most demanding circumstances. None of it mattered. What mattered was that James Morrison was dead. What mattered was that he had made a decision in a single moment that ensured her survival while ensuring his own death. What mattered was the final order he had given her. Lead them home. Rachel opened the journal now and turned to the page she had read hundreds of times over the preceding decade. There was a photograph taped to the page. 6 members of her team standing before a helicopter, their expressions grim but determined, their uniforms dusty with the particular dust of that region. Morrison was in the center, his arm around Rachel's shoulders in a gesture of comradeship that predated the operation that would end his life. Beneath the photograph, written in fading ink across multiple pages, was Rachel's account of Operation Nighthawk. Every detail, every decision, every moment of the 32-minute firefight, every word Morrison had spoken before the RPG found him. And at the bottom of that account, underlined 3 times in pen that had nearly punctured the paper itself: "Lead them home. Led them home. Led them home." Rachel closed the journal and returned it to the shelf where it lived, a private monument to the cost of leadership and the weight of orders given in the moment before death. Tomorrow, Gregory Harmond would begin his solo evolution. Tomorrow, Rachel would finally explain why her methods existed, why her standards were uncompromising, why she had responded to his dismissal and his defensive resistance with such calculated coldness. She was not teaching him for his benefit, though he would benefit from the teaching. She was teaching him because James Morrison had ordered her to lead people home, to ensure they returned not just from battlefields but from the darkness of ignorance about what leadership actually required. Every cadet at Ridgemont Naval Academy who would pass through her program represented an opportunity to fulfill that final order. Gregory Harmond would be the first test of her commitment to that mission. Gregory's alarm vibrated at 0430, pulling him from sleep that had been restless and incomplete. He had spent the previous evening processing the implications of Rachel's assignment. Not the physical demands, which he was confident he could manage, but the isolation of it. Other training evolutions had involved groups, had provided the psychological support of shared struggle. This would be entirely individual, entirely dependent on his own resources. He dressed in full combat gear as specified: body armor, tactical vest, weighted boots, compression shorts under utility pants. He filled his water bottles and secured them to his vest. He reviewed the route to the command center one final time before departing the barracks at 0455, moving through the pre-dawn darkness with the precision of someone executing a clearly defined task. Rachel was waiting at the command center entrance, an unremarkable single-story building positioned at the academy's perimeter near the training facilities. She wore full uniform today, something Gregory had rarely seen her do, and the military bearing she displayed was fundamentally different from the relaxed confidence she typically maintained. This was a woman in her element, operating under authority that transcended the teaching role she normally occupied. "You're 5 minutes early again," Rachel observed. "Your punctuality is noted. Whether it reflects genuine preparation or anxiety-driven overcompensation remains to be determined." She gestured for Gregory to follow her into the command center. The interior was sparse, a single room containing a tactical operations table, communications equipment, and a large map of the Academy's extended training grounds and surrounding terrain. Several Academy staff members occupied positions at the communications station, and Gregory recognized them as the observation team that had monitored his initial assessment course weeks earlier. "Your evolution today will consist of 3 separate phases, each with distinct objectives." Rachel began without preamble. Phase 1, navigation and asset location. Phase 2, tactical assessment and intelligence gathering. Phase 3, extraction and evacuation under compromise scenarios. You will receive sealed instructions at the beginning of each phase. You will not know the subsequent phase parameters until you complete the preceding phase. "Understood." "Understood, ma'am," Gregory replied, his voice steady despite the accelerating awareness that this was fundamentally different from the group training he had previously experienced. Rachel handed him a sealed envelope. "Phase 1 begins at 0500. You have 12 hours to complete all 3 phases. The observation team will monitor your progress via tracking equipment. You will not be completely alone. There are checkpoints where you will receive new instructions and brief medical assessments. But you will receive no guidance beyond the parameters specified in your sealed instructions. Decision-making will be entirely your responsibility." She paused, and something flickered in her expression. Something that might have been empathy if Rachel's demeanor ever accommodated such vulnerability. "One additional element," she continued. "The evolution will incorporate multiple physical and mental stressors simultaneously. Sleep deprivation, caloric deficit, sustained physical exertion, extended decision-making without adequate information. These stressors are not accidental. They are deliberate. They exist because combat conditions do not permit operators the luxury of making decisions when fully rested and adequately resourced. You will learn today to think clearly when your body is demanding relief and your mind is fragmenting. That capacity is what separates adequate commanders from exceptional ones." Gregory absorbed this information, feeling the weight of it in a way that his earlier dismissiveness had never permitted. Phase 1 began at 0500 exactly. Gregory opened his sealed envelope to find coordinates on a laminated map, instructions for locating a supply cache, and parameters defining what he should extract from that cache. The coordinates placed the target location approximately 7 miles from the command center, across terrain that had been partially unfamiliar during his previous training. He moved with steady pace, navigating by map and compass, maintaining tactical awareness despite the fatigue that was already beginning to accumulate. The cache, when he located it at approximately 0730, was positioned in dense brush at the base of an elevation change. Inside the weatherproof container, a larger sealed envelope, supplemental water rations, and a single meal replacement bar. The new sealed envelope contained Phase 2 instructions. Proceed to coordinates 27 Bravo 4. Establish observation position. Monitor target location for 180 minutes. Document guard rotations, activity patterns, and entry/exit protocols. You will encounter staff members simulating security positions. Your task is to observe without being observed. Complete documentation and proceed to checkpoint. Phase 2 was fundamentally different from Phase 1. Navigation was replaced by stillness. The physical demand of movement was replaced by the mental demand of sustained attention. Gregory established his observation position at approximately 0900, concealed in heavy brush with clear sight lines to the target, a pair of academy buildings that had been repurposed as a simulated hostile facility. For 3 hours, he observed. Guard rotations occurred every 40 minutes. 2 guards remained posted at the front entrance at all times. A third guard conducted perimeter patrols every 20 minutes. The building's interior was visible through windows, providing opportunities to assess interior activity and movement patterns. By the time Gregory completed his documentation and moved toward the designated checkpoint at 1200, his mind felt simultaneously overstimulated and depleted. The checkpoint was staffed by one of the observation team members, who took Gregory's documentation, provided him with a medical assessment, blood pressure check, hydration status evaluation, and handed him another sealed envelope along with a small ration pack containing precisely 400 calories, approximately 1/3 of his standard daily intake. Phase 3 instructions read, "Target location has been compromised. Security has been increased. Your task is to extract the asset from the facility while maintaining tactical security and avoiding detection. You have until 1800 hours to complete extraction and deliver the asset to the secondary rally point located at coordinates 33, Echo 7. Detailed tactical briefing attached." The tactical briefing included floor plans of the buildings, current security positioning, and parameters for what would constitute successful extraction. The challenge was immediate and unmistakable. The buildings were now more heavily defended, the guard rotation had increased, and Gregory would need to identify an entry point, navigate the interior, locate the simulated asset, and execute extraction without triggering alarm systems or encountering security personnel. Gregory approached the target location at approximately 14:15, positioning himself to observe updated security patterns. The increased staffing was evident immediately. More guards, tighter patrol patterns, and reinforced entry points. The challenge that had appeared difficult during Phase 2 observation was now substantially more complicated. He spent 40 minutes identifying his approach vector, a side entrance that was not primary secured but was accessible through the landscape. He spent another 30 minutes planning his internal movement pattern, identifying potential compromise scenarios, and establishing contingency responses for multiple threat levels. At approximately 15:30, he initiated his approach. The simulated asset, a weighted training dummy positioned in an upstairs room, was exactly where the briefing had indicated. Gregory reached the location without encountering security personnel, retrieved the asset, and initiated his extraction sequence. He was moving through the building's interior when one of the simulated security personnel appeared in a doorway 30 feet ahead. Gregory froze. The security personnel froze. For a moment, the scenario existed in perfect suspension. Then Gregory moved, not away from the security personnel, but directly toward them with absolute purpose and zero hesitation. The unexpected boldness triggered a response the simulated guard had not prepared for. Gregory reached the guard, placed him in a non-lethal restraint position, and continued moving without pause. He exited through a rear entrance, moved toward the secondary rally point through brush and difficult terrain, and delivered the asset to the designated location at 1703 hours, 57 minutes before the deadline. Rachel was waiting at the secondary rally point, standing with absolute stillness as Gregory approached. His uniform was mud-caked. His breathing was elevated despite his attempts at control, and his mental state was somewhere between exhilaration and complete exhaustion. Phase 3 completion time, 2 hours 48 minutes, Rachel said, consulting her watch. Your extraction was efficient. Your tactical assessment was sound. Your final decision to approach the security personnel directly was unexpected. Explain that choice. Gregory's mind, running on fumes of coherent thought, struggled to formulate a response. The scenario required asset extraction, he said slowly. Non-lethal restraint of opposition personnel was permitted by the operational parameters. Direct approach created maximum uncertainty for the security personnel, reducing their ability to mount effective response. Correct, Rachel acknowledged. You made a decision that violated standard tactical doctrine, approaching opposition directly rather than evading them. That decision succeeded because it was unexpected and demonstrated confidence in your own physical capability. In this specific scenario, that worked. In actual operations, boldness without genuine capability is lethal. Do you understand the distinction? Yes, ma'am, Gregory replied. You've been operational for approximately 9 hours, Rachel continued. You've consumed approximately 400 calories. You've had minimal water despite sustained physical exertion in coastal terrain. Your decision-making capacity is significantly diminished from baseline, and yet you executed complex tactical scenarios with reasonable competence. That is what actual leadership demands. Not decisions made when you're rested and resourced. Decisions made when your body is screaming for relief and your mind is fragmenting. She paused, and her expression shifted into something Gregory had never witnessed before. Something that might have been respect. You arrived at this evolution resistant, Rachel said. You believed your understanding was sufficient. You believed your capability was adequate. You believed you could dismiss someone whose background you did not comprehend. Today, you've experienced a fraction of what actual operations involve. You've begun to understand the gap between your self-assessment and actual reality. Gregory stood silent, unable to formulate response, feeling something fundamental shifting in his psychological architecture. Report to the medical facility for full evaluation, Rachel instructed. Then rest. Tomorrow, your actual training begins. As Gregory moved toward the medical facility, his body moving through the motions while his mind processed the magnitude of what he had just experienced, he understood with absolute clarity that the Gregory Harmond who had arrived at the command center this morning was not the same person who was leaving it now. The gap between self-perception and reality had finally become undeniable. Gregory spent the remainder of that Saturday in the medical facility undergoing comprehensive evaluation. Blood work, cardiovascular assessment, neurological checks, the standard protocols for cadets who had undergone extended physical and mental stress. The medical personnel noted elevated cortisol levels, significant caloric deficit, mild dehydration despite his water consumption, and the kind of physical exhaustion that required genuine rest for adequate recovery. He was released at approximately 2,100 hours with explicit instructions to consume adequate calories, hydrate extensively, and achieve minimum 8 hours of sleep before resuming any training activities. He complied without resistance, understanding at some level that his body required recovery more urgently than his mind required understanding. Sunday morning brought a message. Report to Rachel's office at 1,000 hours. Not a training evolution, not a group session, but a directed meeting in the administrative area of the academy. Gregory spent the morning in genuine confusion about what such a meeting might entail. Rachel's office was not a location cadets typically occupied. Her professional space existed in some intersection between command authority and personal retreat, accessible but somehow removed from the standard academy environment. Her office occupied a corner of the administration building's 3rd floor, a position that provided windows overlooking both the parade ground and the coastal landscape. The space itself was sparse, similar to Rachel's apartment but modified for institutional function. A desk, filing cabinets, a single comfortable chair positioned to face the window. Nothing decorative, nothing personal except a single framed photograph on her desk, its contents not immediately visible from the doorway. Rachel was waiting when Gregory arrived, standing at the window with her hands clasped behind her back, observing the parade ground where other cadets were conducting morning physical training under supervision of standard instructors. "Close the door," Rachel said without turning. "This is not an official meeting. What occurs in this conversation remains between us." "Understood." "Understood, ma'am," Gregory replied, securing the office door. "Sit," Rachel instructed, gesturing to the chair. She remained standing, her posture suggesting absolute control and presence. "Yesterday, you experienced a fraction of what actual operational conditions demand." Rachel began, still facing the window. "You experienced physical stress. You experienced sleep deprivation. You experienced decision-making with incomplete information and inadequate resources. You survived it. That fact alone distinguishes you from many others, but survival is not the objective of your training. Understanding is. She turned from the window, and Gregory was struck by the expression on her face. Something raw and genuine that she typically held beneath layers of professional composure. I want to explain why your training is what it is, Rachel continued. I want to explain why I responded to your dismissal with such deliberate coldness. And I want to explain why I selected you specifically for this program when you gave me every reason to exclude you. She moved to her desk and picked up the framed photograph. She held it for a moment, studying it herself before extending it toward Gregory. The photograph showed 6 service members standing before a military helicopter, their expressions grim but determined, their uniforms dusty with the particular dust of combat environments. The central figure was a man in his early 30s, his arm around a younger woman. Rachel, Gregory realized with immediate shock. She looked different in the photograph, younger perhaps, but also something else. She looked hopeful. That photograph was taken in 2012, Rachel said. The location was Afghanistan. The operation was called Nighthawk. The man with his arm around my shoulders was Lieutenant James Morrison. He was my team leader. He was the finest officer I have ever served with. He was also dead 3 hours after this photograph was taken. Gregory felt something shift in the room's atmosphere, a weight that had not been present moments earlier. Rachel continued, her voice maintaining its measured quality despite the content. We were tasked with extracting an intelligence asset from hostile territory. The intelligence on which the entire operation was based had been deliberately compromised. We walked into an ambush that we did not see coming until we were already committed to extraction. During the firefight that followed, Morrison made a decision. An RPG was incoming. It was positioned to impact my location. Morrison placed himself between that weapon and me. She paused, and Gregory watched as she controlled her expression, as she pulled the raw emotion back beneath professional composure. He died because of that decision. He made that choice because he believed that my leadership capability was essential to the survival of the rest of the team. His last instruction to me, given moments before he lost consciousness, was simple. Lead them home. Rachel returned the photograph to her desk, positioning it so that it faced away from Gregory but where she could see it, a monument visible only to her. For the next decade, I executed that instruction, Rachel continued. I completed 14 deployments. I led 203 combat operations. I made decisions that ensured personnel returned home. I received commendations and recognition and advancement. But every single operation was ultimately in service to Morrison's final order. Led them home. She moved to the window again, her gaze returning to the parade ground below. When I was offered medical retirement after a piece of shrapnel embedded itself near my spine, I refused it. I did not want to disappear into civilian life while Morrison remained in the past. But continued operational deployment was no longer viable. Captain Voss offered me an alternative. Come to Ridgemont and train the next generation of officers. Give them the kind of education that Morrison had given me. Ensure they understand what leadership actually costs before they have to learn it through the death of someone they respect. Rachel turned to face Gregory directly. That is why I am here. That is why your training is what it is. That is why I will not permit you or any other cadet to advance through this program without understanding the true weight of command responsibility. Gregory absorbed this information, feeling the structure of his recent experience reorganizing itself in his mind. The sealed envelopes were not arbitrary. The physical stressors were not cruel. The escalating scenarios were not punishment. They were deliberate attempts to create conditions where decision-making clarity required absolute honesty about capability and limitation. Why me? Gregory asked. The question emerged before he had fully considered it. Why did you select me if my initial resistance gave you reason to exclude me? Because your resistance revealed the exact flaw that destroys young officers, Rachel replied. Your certainty that your family's position and your academic achievement and your natural capability were sufficient preparation for command. I recognized that flaw because I have seen what it does when it remains unchecked. I have seen officers make decisions that killed people because they believed their understanding was adequate when it was actually dangerously incomplete. She paused, and something that might have been gentleness touched her expression. Your dismissal of me was not personal, Rachel continued. It was symptomatic of a larger problem. A commander who cannot recognize capability outside their own expected parameters is a commander who will fail when actual operations demand them to adapt. Your evolution yesterday was not designed to break you or to punish you. It was designed to create conditions where you would be forced to trust your own judgment despite uncertainty. To make decisions when you could not be certain you were right. To function when your resources were inadequate. Those are the conditions that define actual command. When I saw you approach that security personnel directly yesterday, I saw someone beginning to understand that certainty was less important than clarity. Gregory felt something crystallize in his understanding. You're not teaching us to be special operators, he said slowly. You're teaching us to understand that we don't know what we don't know. Correct, Rachel acknowledged. That understanding is the foundation of everything. Humility about capability. Awareness of limitation. Respect for the cost of command. Officers who understand those principles make decisions that bring people home. Officers who don't understand them make decisions that create additional Lieutenant Morrisons. She moved behind her desk and sat, gesturing for Gregory to remain in his chair. Your training continues, Rachel said, but it continues differently now. You're no longer being assessed as someone resisting instruction. You're being developed as someone capable of genuine leadership if you continue to prioritize understanding over certainty. The sessions will be intensive. They will be demanding, but they will also be purposeful. Every element will be designed to teach you something essential about what actual command requires. Gregory felt the weight of it. Not the physical weight of the previous day's evolution, but the psychological weight of genuine responsibility. Rachel was not training him to succeed. She was training him to survive and to ensure others survived with him. One final element, Rachel said. Tomorrow you'll join the larger training group again, but they will be observing you. They will see what evolved from your specialized evolution. Some will respect that. Some will resent it. Your task is to demonstrate, through your actions and decisions, that the intensity you experienced was not punishment but opportunity. That understanding is what will define whether this program succeeds in fundamentally changing how Ridgemont's officers approach command responsibility. Gregory understood, in that moment, that he had crossed a threshold from which there was no return. The certainty that had defined his academy experience had been replaced by something more valuable and infinitely more complex. Genuine awareness of how much he still needed to learn. The week following Gregory's private meeting with Rachel proceeded with a rhythm different from anything that had preceded it. Monday morning brought him back to the parade ground with the larger training group, and he felt immediately the shift in how others perceived him. The cadets who had observed his solo evolution assignment with a mixture of sympathy and vindication now regarded him differently. Not with resentment exactly, but with the careful distance people maintain when they recognize someone has experienced something beyond their own frame of reference. Rachel's approach to the group training evolved as well. She maintained the same rigorous standards, the same demanding scenarios, but with Gregory, she demonstrated something she had not previously shown. Explicit connection between specific training elements and the principles underlying them. When conducting a leadership scenario involving resource allocation under scarcity, she briefly explained the decision-making architecture they were learning, how to distinguish between immediate pressure and strategic priority. When implementing a physical endurance challenge that incorporated problem-solving components, she articulated the connection between sustained physical stress and mental clarity degradation. The other cadets absorbed these explanations, but Gregory understood them with a different depth. Having lived through the extremes, Rachel was now teaching at measured intensity. 3 weeks into the expanded program, Captain David Voss requested a formal briefing regarding the Advanced Leadership Development Curriculum. The briefing was scheduled for Tuesday afternoon in the Academy's Tactical Operations classroom, a large auditorium equipped with presentation technology and secure communication systems. Present were Captain Voss, Admiral Richard Harmond, Gregory's father, who had insisted on observing the program in which his son was engaged, and several other senior Academy officials. Rachel arrived early, reviewing materials on a tablet while Academy staff arranged presentation equipment. She had selected specific data points to highlight: performance metrics from the various training evolutions, psychological assessments administered at baseline and post-training intervals, comparative analysis between cadets in her program and standard academy graduates regarding decision-making capability under stress scenarios. She wore her dress uniform today, the formal navy blues with ribbons and insignia that visually articulated the authority behind her instruction. The silver star was prominently displayed, impossible to ignore, a constant reminder to anyone observing that her methods derived from more than theoretical knowledge. Gregory was summoned to the briefing room at approximately 1430 hours. He arrived in dress uniform, standing at attention before the assembled senior officers, uncertain of the purpose of his presence. Cadet Reynolds, Captain Voss began. We are conducting a formal review of the Advanced Leadership Development Program. Commander Winters has requested your participation in discussing your experiences within the curriculum. Please take a seat. Rachel stood and approached a presentation screen. She displayed a series of satellite imagery and tracking data from Gregory's solo evolution, overlay images showing his navigation route, timing at each checkpoint, and decision points during Phase 3 execution. Cadet Reynolds entered the advanced program under involuntary circumstances. Rachel began, her presentation voice carrying the same measured authority she used in all contexts. His initial response to the curriculum was resistant. He questioned methodology, dismissed instructional purpose, and demonstrated the specific cognitive flaw that I have identified as most dangerous in young officers: certainty about capability without adequate evidence supporting that certainty. She advanced to the next presentation slide, which showed comparative decision-making metrics between Gregory's baseline performance and his performance following intensive training. Initial assessment showed solid technical proficiency, Rachel continued, adequate physical conditioning, appropriate academic knowledge. However, decision-making under incomplete information was characterized by pattern matching to previous experience rather than genuine analysis of novel circumstances. His approach to novel scenarios was to force-fit them into existing mental models rather than adapting his mental models to accommodate new information. Admiral Harmond watched this assessment of his son with the careful attention of someone evaluating testimony about something personally significant. His expression remained neutral, but Gregory recognized the intensity of his father's focus. Following specialized individual assessment and intensive training incorporating sustained physical and cognitive stress, Rachel continued, we observe significant development in decision-making methodology. Cadet Reynolds demonstrates improved capacity for maintaining clarity under conditions of sleep deprivation, caloric deficit, and sustained decision-making demands. His tactical assessments incorporate broader environmental factors. His leadership decisions prioritize team welfare over mission completion, a shift suggesting improved understanding of responsibility hierarchy. She advanced to another slide showing Gregory's performance during group training sessions over the past 3 weeks. Most significantly, Cadet Reynolds has demonstrated the capacity to integrate feedback, modify approach based on new information, and acknowledge limitation in his own knowledge and capability. These characteristics represent the foundational elements that distinguish adequate commanders from exceptional ones. Rachel turned to face Gregory directly. Cadet Reynolds, describe how your understanding of leadership has evolved since entering this program. Gregory felt every eye in the room focus on him. He had prepared no formal response, had not anticipated this direct question in such an official context. But he found that his understanding was clear enough to articulate without extensive preparation. When I arrived at this program, Gregory began slowly, choosing his words with care. I believed leadership was primarily about technical proficiency and decisiveness. I believed that knowing the right answer and executing it efficiently was the core of command responsibility. He paused, gathering the next part of his response. The specialized training demonstrated that this understanding was incomplete, he continued. I learned that decisions made without adequate information, made under stress without clarity, can be technically sound but strategically wrong. I learned that leadership is less about being right and more about maintaining function when circumstances prevent certainty. I learned that understanding what you don't know is more important than being confident about what you do. He addressed his father directly. The training showed me that family position and academic achievement don't translate to command readiness. They're foundational, but they're not sufficient. True command readiness requires understanding responsibility for people, understanding the cost of decisions, understanding that mistakes don't just affect mission completion. They affect people's ability to return home. Admiral Harmon's expression shifted slightly. Not quite approval, but something adjacent to it, recognition that his son had experienced something meaningful. Rachel returned to her presentation, displaying comparative data from cadets in her program versus standard academy graduates who had advanced to junior command positions. Our preliminary data suggests that officers trained through this curriculum demonstrate measurably improved performance in high-stress operational scenarios, she explained. Their decision-making incorporates more contextual factors. Their leadership demonstrates higher regard for personnel welfare. Most significantly, their retention of personnel under their command is statistically higher than comparison groups, suggesting improved morale and psychological safety within their units. She turned off the presentation screen. The Advanced Leadership Development Program is not designed to create special operations candidates, Rachel concluded. It is designed to ensure that officers graduating from Ridgemont understand what command actually demands before they are in positions where their misunderstanding costs lives. It is designed to create humility about capability, respect for the weight of responsibility, and clarity about the true purpose of military leadership. Captain Voss stood, his expression thoughtful. "Commander, your methods are unconventional," he said. "The intensity of the program, the deliberate psychological pressure, the individual evolution elements, these exist outside standard academy protocols. I need to understand your rationale for this approach." Rachel was quiet for a moment before responding. "Captain, in 2012, I served with an officer named Lieutenant James Morrison," she began, and Gregory recognized the controlled quality in her voice that indicated emotional content beneath professional delivery. "He made a decision that ensured my survival at the cost of his own. His final instruction to me was to lead others home, not just from battlefields, but from the darkness of insufficient understanding." She paused, and every person in the room seemed to recognize that something significant was being articulated. "I designed this curriculum to fulfill that instruction," Rachel continued, "to ensure that cadets understand what leadership costs before they are in positions where that cost is written in human lives. To ensure they understand that excellence is not about technical proficiency but about responsibility for others. To ensure that when they are in actual command situations, they make decisions that bring their people home." She looked directly at Admiral Harmon. "Admiral, your son will command people someday. Those people will trust him with their lives. They will execute decisions that his judgment determines. My program is designed to ensure he understands that responsibility fully before he assumes it. That understanding is not comfortable. It is not always pleasant, but it is essential." Admiral Harmon stood slowly. "Commander, I came to this briefing prepared to question your methods," he said carefully. "I am leaving prepared to support them, not because they are comfortable, but because they serve what I understand to be the actual purpose of military leadership education." He looked at Gregory briefly, something unspoken passing between father and son. Recognition, perhaps, that the path Gregory was following was different from the path that had been assumed, but possibly more important. "Captain Voss," Admiral Harmon continued, "I recommend expansion of this program. Institutionalize it. Make it a standard component of leadership development rather than a specialized curriculum. If the methods produce officers who understand their responsibility as Commander Winters describes, then the Academy has an obligation to implement those methods for all cadets advancing to command positions." Voss nodded thoughtfully. "Commander Winters, prepare a proposal for program expansion," he instructed. "Outline resource requirements, timeline considerations, and metrics for success. We will present this to the Naval Operations Command with my full endorsement." As the briefing concluded and officers began departing, Admiral Harmon approached Gregory briefly. "You've changed," he observed simply. "I'm not entirely certain I understand what changed or why, but I recognize that something fundamental has shifted. That suggests Commander Winters understands something important about leadership that I may have missed in my own career. Then he was gone, leaving Gregory with the profound awareness that even his father's recognition of his transformation was secondary to the larger reality. The Academy was about to institutionalize Rachel's program, ensuring that future generations would experience what he had experienced. Rachel was organizing her presentation materials when Gregory approached her. "The program is going to expand," he said. It was not a question. "Yes," Rachel replied, "which means I will need additional instructors. Individuals who understand the methodology and can implement it consistently across larger populations. I will need to select carefully." She paused, looking at Gregory directly. "You will graduate in 4 months," she continued. "After graduation, the Naval Operations Command has offered you a position in the Advanced Training Command. You would assist in implementing the expanded program. I believe you would be effective in that role." Gregory understood what she was offering. Not just a position, but a continuation of his own transformation through teaching others. A way to honor Morrison's final order by helping bring others home through understanding. "I accept," he said simply. Rachel nodded once, acknowledging the magnitude of what had just been agreed upon. The announcement came through official channels on Wednesday. Mandatory assembly for all Academy personnel on Friday at 1900 hours in the main auditorium. Dress uniforms required. No exceptions. The brevity of the announcement sparked immediate speculation among the cadet corps. Mandatory assemblies were rare, typically reserved for major institutional changes, visiting dignitaries, or significant administrative announcements. Gregory knew what the assembly would entail, though Rachel had instructed him to refrain from discussing it with his peers. The expanded program required institutional acknowledgement. The expanded program required public understanding of the methodology's foundation. The expanded program required, ultimately, that Rachel's background be revealed not as whispered rumors or classified references, but as open acknowledgement of who she was and what her presence at Ridgemont represented. Friday evening arrived with the kind of clear, cold weather that coastal regions produced in late autumn. The main auditorium was a cavernous space designed for precisely these kinds of events. Tiered seating rising in gentle slopes toward the stage, projection systems capable of displaying detailed imagery, and acoustic design that permitted speakers to be heard without strain across the entire space. By 1845 hours, the auditorium was full, 600 cadets occupying the lower sections, faculty and senior academy staff positioned in reserved areas, Admiral Harmond and several other visiting officers present in the front row administrative section. Captain Voss took the stage at precisely 1900 hours. His bearing suggested this was a significant moment, something beyond routine institutional business. "Good evening," Voss began, his voice carrying without apparent effort across the auditorium. "Tonight's assembly serves 2 purposes. First, to announce a major institutional initiative. Second, to formally introduce an officer whose background and experience have been restricted from general knowledge for operational security reasons, but whose presence at Ridgemont and whose methodology deserve public acknowledgement." A ripple of whispered conversation moved through the cadet sections. This was beyond routine business. This was something significant. Over the past 2 months, Voss continued, a specialized advanced leadership development program has been implemented under the direction of Commander Rachel Winters. This program represents a fundamental shift in how Ridgemont approaches officer education. The program will be expanded, beginning next semester, to encompass all cadets advancing toward command positions. He paused, allowing that announcement to settle. To explain the program's foundation and to properly introduce Commander Winters, I am yielding the stage to her. Voss stepped aside. Rachel emerged from the wings, moving toward the center of the stage with the measured confidence that had become her trademark at Ridgemont. But tonight, she was not wearing the gray tracksuit or the standard physical training uniform. She wore her full-dress navy blues, and the collection of decorations on her chest caught the auditorium's lighting in ways that made the ribbons and insignia impossible to ignore. The entire assembly seemed to pause. The cadets recognized immediately that something was different, something shifted. The woman they had known as their physical training instructor appeared transformed by the formal uniform and the deliberate presentation. Rachel approached the podium. She surveyed the assembled auditorium with the same measuring gaze she had turned on individual cadets, seeming to catalog faces and reactions, seeming to assess the room's readiness for what she was about to articulate. "My name is Commander Rachel Winters," she began, her voice calm and controlled. "For the past 2 months, I have been working with a select group of your cadets on a specialized curriculum. That curriculum exists because of something I learned more than a decade ago, and because of an officer whose sacrifice taught me the true meaning of military leadership." The auditorium fell completely silent. Every cadet was leaning forward slightly, sensing that this was not routine instruction but something approaching revelation. "In 2012, I was a captain assigned to Naval Special Warfare Development Group, commonly known as SEAL Team 6, Rachel continued. I commanded a 6-person tactical unit specializing in rapid extraction operations. We were deployed to Afghanistan on a mission designated Operation Nighthawk. The operation was designed to extract a high-value intelligence asset from hostile territory." She paused, and Gregory recognized the careful control in that pause, the moment where she was managing the emotional weight beneath professional delivery. "The mission encountered complications that intelligence assessments had not anticipated," Rachel continued. "What was supposed to be a straightforward extraction became a firefight against overwhelming force. During that engagement, my team leader, Lieutenant James Morrison, made a decision that fundamentally altered the course of my life. An incoming weapon was positioned toward my location. Morrison placed himself between that weapon and me. He died so that I could live. His final instruction to me, given moments before he lost consciousness, was simple: lead them home." The auditorium was absolutely still. Every cadet, every faculty member, every visiting officer understood they were witnessing something beyond routine institutional business. They were witnessing personal revelation from someone who had experienced something that transcended academic knowledge. "I received the Navy Cross for my actions during that operation," Rachel continued. "But the medal means nothing compared to the cost. Morrison was the finest officer I have ever served with, and his death was the defining moment of my career and my life. For the next decade, I spent 203 combat operations in service to his final order. I made decisions that ensured personnel returned home. I advanced through the ranks. I received recognition and commendation." She stepped to the side of the podium, her posture shifting into something more conversational. "But I realized that individual operational success was insufficient. Morrison's order was not just to lead people home from battlefields. It was to lead them home from ignorance about what leadership actually demands. It was to ensure that future officers understood what that responsibility truly means before they were in positions where their misunderstanding cost lives." Rachel gestured, and the projection screens behind her illuminated. The photograph of her 6-person team appeared, large enough that individual faces were clearly visible. There was Morrison, his arm around Rachel's shoulders. There was the helicopter behind them. There was the dust of combat environments coating their uniforms. "This is the team I served with on Operation Nighthawk," Rachel said. "This is the team that taught me what leadership means. And this is the team that motivated me to come to Ridgemont and implement a curriculum designed to create officers who understand, before they assume command, what their responsibility for others truly entails." The photograph dissolved, replaced by official military documentation. A Navy Cross citation visible on the screens. Operational records showing deployment dates and classifications. Service records documenting her advancement and assignments. "The Advanced Leadership Development Program I have implemented is unconventional," Rachel continued. "It is intensive. It is demanding. It incorporates physical stress, psychological pressure, and decision-making scenarios designed to force clarity about capability and limitation. I implement these methodologies because they reflect the only environment where genuine understanding can be forged, the environment where stakes are not theoretical but real, where resources are inadequate, where decisions must be made without certainty." She turned to address the cadets directly. "Many of you have heard rumors about the program," Rachel said. "You have speculated about my background and my methods. Tonight, I am telling you officially, your speculation was correct. I am a combat veteran. I have led people in actual military operations. I have made decisions that cost lives and decisions that saved them. I have experienced what it means to lose someone you respect to the consequences of inadequate preparation for the demands they were facing. Another pause, and the weight of that pause was absolute. The Academy is expanding this program, Rachel continued. Beginning next semester, all cadets advancing toward command positions will undergo intensive training designed to develop the understanding that academic instruction alone cannot provide. This training will be uncomfortable. Some of you will question it. Some of you will resent it. That is expected. But I can tell you with absolute certainty that officers who complete this program understand something essential that officers trained through conventional methods often do not. They understand that their decisions affect actual human beings, and that understanding is the foundation of genuine leadership. She moved to the center of the stage. Cadet Gregory Harmond represents the first graduate of this specialized program, Rachel announced, and every head in the auditorium turned toward the section where Gregory was seated. Cadet Harmond began the program with significant resistance. He dismissed my background. He questioned my methodology. He believed his family legacy and academic achievement were sufficient preparation for command. Over the past 2 months, he has learned that understanding is more important than certainty, that humility about capability is more important than confidence and excellence, and that leadership is fundamentally about responsibility for others rather than personal achievement. Gregory felt the weight of attention, but he also felt something else. The recognition that his transformation was being publicly acknowledged not as personal achievement but as evidence of what the program could accomplish. Cadet Harmond has accepted a position with the Naval Operations Command upon graduation, Rachel continued. He will assist in implementing the expanded program across all institutions within our military education system. His willingness to transform his own understanding and to commit to ensuring that other cadets experience that transformation is exactly what military leadership requires. Admiral Harmon's expression shifted, and Gregory saw recognition in his father's face. Understanding that his son's path had transformed into something larger than simple career progression, Rachel turned to face the entire assembly one final time. "My presence at Ridgemont is not a placeholder assignment," she said quietly. "It is the fulfillment of a debt I owe to an officer who gave his life so that I could live. It is my answer to his final order. Lead them home, not just from battlefields, but from the darkness of inadequate understanding about what leadership demands. That is my mission here. That is the purpose of this program. And that is why I will not compromise on intensity, on demand, or on the expectation that every officer who graduates from this program understands, at a fundamental level, what the responsibility of command actually means." The auditorium erupted, not in applause immediately, but in the kind of sudden movement that came when people absorbed something that fundamentally reorganized their understanding of reality. Then the applause began, starting from the back sections and rolling forward like a wave, growing in intensity until the entire auditorium was acknowledging what they had just witnessed. Rachel remained at the center of the stage, her expression returning to its standard analytical neutrality, but Gregory recognized something in her eyes. The acknowledgement that Morrison's final order was being fulfilled, one cadet at a time, one moment of transformation at a time. Captain Voss returned to the podium as the applause continued. "The expanded program begins next semester," he announced. "Participation will be mandatory for all cadets designated for command trajectories. Voluntary participation from other cadets will be accommodated within resource parameters. Commander Winters will oversee the program's implementation with full institutional support." As the assembly concluded and cadets began departing, the atmosphere at Ridgemont had fundamentally shifted. The woman who had been rumored about, speculated upon, and partially dismissed had been revealed as someone whose background and experience transcended any academic position. She was not an instructor making a career transition. She was a combat veteran honoring a debt. She was a leader teaching the next generation what leadership actually meant. And the program she had created was no longer a specialized experiment but the foundation of how Ridgemont would shape officers for the future. The transformation at Ridgemont Naval Academy did not happen overnight, but it happened with unmistakable clarity. In the weeks following the public assembly, the atmosphere on the parade ground shifted. Cadets approached physical training with a different intensity, a different awareness of purpose. They understood now that the person leading their instruction was not a logistics officer or a routine administrator, but someone whose background transcended their own frame of reference. They understood that the standards being imposed were rooted in actual operational experience, that the demands were not arbitrary but derived from the lessons learned through the highest cost. The Advanced Leadership Development Program, in its expanded form, began implementation the following semester. 12 additional instructors joined Rachel, each selected through a rigorous vetting process that prioritized combat experience and demonstrated understanding of the program's foundational principles. Most were career military personnel. Several, like Rachel, were navigating transitions from operational deployment to educational responsibility. They brought with them not just technical expertise but the weight of their own lessons learned, the casualties they had experienced, the understanding that military leadership was fundamentally about responsibility for others. Gregory completed his final semester as a cadet while simultaneously beginning his transition to instructor status. The arrangement was unusual but necessary. Rachel needed someone who had experienced the program's intensity personally, who could articulate to new cohorts what the training actually demanded, who could serve as living proof that the program's methods produced officers capable of genuine growth. On the morning of graduation, for months after the public assembly, Gregory stood in his dress uniform on the parade ground where he had first dismissed Rachel as a contractor at the security gate. The parade ground glistened under brilliant sunshine, the ceremony attended by families, academy officials, and visiting military dignitaries. Admiral Harmon stood in the reviewing section, his expression reflecting pride that transcended the typical father at graduation moment. Gregory received his commission as an ensign in the United States Navy. He received academic honors. He received recognition for leadership development. But the most significant moment came when Rachel presented him with the Advanced Program Completion Certificate, a formal document acknowledging not just academic achievement but demonstrated mastery of the program's core principles. "You have understood what many officers never grasp," Rachel said quietly, in the moment when the certificate was presented. "You have learned that leadership is not about yourself. It is about the people you are responsible for. Carry that understanding forward. The Navy needs officers who comprehend that distinction." Gregory understood that Rachel was not simply presenting a certificate. She was offering a kind of blessing, an acknowledgement that he had truly transformed from the resistant cadet who had dismissed her at the security gate to someone capable of honoring the principles that Morrison's sacrifice had established. 2 weeks following graduation, Gregory reported to the Naval Operations Command's Advanced Training Facility, a sprawling complex located approximately 40 miles from Ridgemont. The facility served as the coordinating center for the expanded program's implementation across all Navy training institutions. Rachel was there, operating as the program's director and primary architect, overseeing curriculum development, instructor training, and the careful rollout of methodology that had been refined through months of intensive work at Ridgemont. Gregory's role was officially titled Assistant Curriculum Director, but his actual function was more nuanced. He served as a translator between Rachel's operational experience and the instructors who lacked that background. He worked with new cohorts during their initial assessment phases, providing perspective on what the training would entail and why it was being implemented. He consulted with cadets who struggled with the program's intensity, helping them understand that resistance was not failure but a normal response to confronting the gap between self-perception and actual capability. 6 months after Gregory's graduation, Rachel authorized the first comprehensive program assessment across all participating institutions. The data was striking. Cadets trained through the advanced curriculum demonstrated measurably improved performance in high-stress scenario simulations. Their decision-making incorporated broader contextual factors. Their leadership demonstrated higher regard for personnel welfare. Most significantly, when these officers began assuming junior command positions, their units demonstrated higher morale, lower personnel attrition, and improved performance metrics across all measured dimensions. One evening, working late in the Advanced Training Facilities Administrative Center, Gregory and Rachel reviewed the assessment data together. Gregory had become comfortable in her presence in a way that transcended the formal instructor-student dynamic. He understood her now, understood what drove her, what motivated her methods, what she was actually trying to accomplish. "It's working," Gregory observed, reviewing the comparative data. "Across all institutions, the program is producing measurable change in how officers approach command responsibility." Rachel nodded, but her expression suggested something beyond simple satisfaction with metrics and data. "Morrison would have approved," she said quietly. "He understood what I'm only now fully comprehending, that leadership education is not about making better commanders. It's about preventing the specific kinds of failure that Morrison experienced. The failures that come from officers who don't understand the weight of what they're commanding." She pulled up another data set, this one showing retention rates among personnel serving under officers trained through the advanced program. "Look at these numbers," Rachel continued. "Personnel retention is 15% higher than baseline. That means people are choosing to continue serving under officers trained through this curriculum. They feel safer. They feel respected. They believe their commander understands their value as individuals rather than simply as operational assets." Gregory understood what Rachel was articulating without requiring explicit statement. The program was working not because it was intense or demanding, but because it created officers who fundamentally understood that military leadership was about something more profound than mission completion. It was about responsibility for human beings, for their welfare, for their opportunity to return home. "Have you ever considered what you'll do after this?" Gregory asked. "After the program is fully implemented and institutionalized?" Rachel was quiet for a long moment, her gaze returning to the window where the distant landscape was barely visible in the gathering darkness. "I don't know if I'll ever be finished," she said finally. "Morrison's order was to lead people home. That order doesn't have an expiration date. It doesn't have a moment of completion. As long as I'm capable of teaching what I've learned, as long as I can help transform officers' understanding of what leadership means, I'll continue. Because every officer I help transform is another person who will make decisions that bring their people home instead of putting them in unnecessary danger." She turned from the window to face Gregory directly. "You understand that now, don't you?" Rachel asked. "You understand that this isn't about your advancement or your career achievement. It's about the legacy you're going to create, the people you're going to influence, the decisions you're going to help shape." "I do," Gregory replied, and he meant it with absolute certainty. "Every day, I understand it more clearly." Back at Ridgemont Naval Academy, the transformation had become institutionalized. The parade ground still looked precisely as it had for 96 years, but the cadets who moved across it understood something fundamentally different about military service. They understood that excellence was not about personal achievement. They understood that leadership was about responsibility. They understood that the standards being imposed were not arbitrary or cruel, but rooted in the understanding that their future decisions would affect actual human beings. New cadets entering the academy for their first semester underwent preliminary exposure to the program's principles. Cadets advancing toward command trajectories underwent intensive training similar to what Gregory had experienced, modified but maintaining the core elements. Physical stress combined with decision-making demands, scenarios with incomplete information, situations where resources were inadequate and clarity was essential. Rachel maintained her presence at Ridgemont, spending 3 days each week at the academy and 2 days at the advanced training facility directing institutional implementation. She had become something beyond an instructor. She had become the living embodiment of the program's foundational principle, that military leadership was fundamentally about understanding the weight of responsibility for others. On an evening approximately 1 year after the public assembly, Rachel stood in her office at Ridgemont, looking at the framed photograph of her team from Operation Nighthawk. The photograph had moved from private monument to public acknowledgement. It hung in the Academy's administrative building, visible to cadets and staff as a constant reminder of the sacrifice that had inspired the program's creation. She placed her hand on the photograph, her fingers touching Morrison's face in the image. "I'm fulfilling your order, James," she said quietly, speaking to the photograph as she had done countless times over the preceding decade, but with a different quality now. Not one person at a time, but institution by institution. Hundreds of officers will graduate from programs rooted in what you taught me. Thousands of service members will serve under officers shaped by understanding that Morrison's sacrifice illuminated. She withdrew her hand and stepped back, regarding the photograph with the calm satisfaction of someone who has found purpose aligned with calling. The door to her office opened, and Gregory entered, carrying reports that needed review. "The newest cohort assessment data from the facility," he said, extending the materials. "The baseline resistance has shifted. These cadets are entering the program expecting intensity. They understand now that the intensity is the point, not an obstacle to overcome." Rachel accepted the reports and reviewed them briefly before looking up at Gregory with an expression that suggested recognition of how far both of them had traveled from that initial moment at the security gate. "You know what this means?" Rachel asked. "It means the program is sustainable. It means we've moved beyond novelty or special case. We've created a methodology that can be replicated, that can be transmitted to other instructors, that can become the standard rather than the exception." Gregory nodded, understanding the full implication of that statement. "Morrison's order," he said, "is no longer dependent on you alone to fulfill it." "Exactly," Rachel confirmed. "I've transformed the mission from personal responsibility to institutional responsibility. That's not the end of my work. It's the beginning of something larger." She returned to the photograph, but her gaze suggested she was looking through it to something beyond, to the future officers this program would create, to the personnel who would serve under those officers, to the families who would welcome home service members because their commanders understood what responsibility actually meant. Outside, the parade ground of Ridgemont Naval Academy gleamed under evening light. Cadets moved across it with purpose that had shifted from simple routine compliance to genuine understanding of what military service required. The fog that had characterized the beginning of Rachel's tenure had lifted, replaced by clarity about the institution's true purpose. Morrison's final order, "Lead them home," had become not just the guiding principle of one woman's career, but the foundation of how an entire military institution would shape the officers responsible for others' lives. The transformation was not complete. It would never be complete. But it was real, it was spreading, and it was changing the trajectory of how military leadership would be understood and practiced for generations to come. Rachel stood in her office, looking at Morrison's photograph, and allowed herself the smallest acknowledgement that her mission was being fulfilled exactly as he had intended. Not through her individual excellence, but through the transformation of countless others who would carry that understanding forward into their own command responsibilities. Led them home. The order remained. The mission continued. And the legacy of sacrifice had become the foundation of a new standard of excellence at Ridgemont Naval Academy and across the institutions that would adopt the program Rachel Winters had created. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.